So today for this fourth episode I want to dive deeper into the possible origins of art and how can we learn from the essence of art by questioning what role shamanism played in the context of artistic creations and endeavors. I consider shamanism to be one of the ancestors' founding members, is to say a crucial factor in the origin of art. And even though we can say right now that the artist and the shaman are two different roles, they've often been mixed up in the past. Although there is an interesting transformation taking place. I mean, if we look back to the role shamans had in this Western society at the beginning of this millennium, 20 years ago, the shaman was exploring mystic realms in the shadows of civilization, and there was no place for shamans in a capitalist society. In fact, most of the shamans or shamanic people were considered to be performing a strange hobby like floating around without shoes or wearing some strange sandals, burning a collection of herbs and leaves. And every small family or community had in some way or another a connection to a particular strange uncle or a friendly outcast playing drums and chanting rhythms. Nobody really knew what they were up to, and the rational framework of our educational system and the job market never really took shamans serious. And gladly enough, this stuff is changing. Excitingly enough, we're going back to the essence and we're becoming more aware about how amazing these people actually are. The shamans, the guardians of the bridges and the portals connecting our earthly planes to the invisible realms. Call it the spirit worlds or the mystery, others might even call it the subconscious. The shaman who manages to travel throughout the whole different dimension to acquire new information and knowledge to help his or her community. Often with the use of psychedelic substances or trance-awakening rhythms and sounds, the shaman is coming back and finding a place again in the current society. And in contradiction with the artists, shamans have been there since the dawn of mankind and have never really disappeared. The shaman had rituals, ceremonies, and all kinds of objects like sang songs in order to heal the tribe members and the community. The shaman served the common higher good and knew how to connect with non-human teachers such as the teachers from the kingdoms of animals and plants. And right now, 20 years later, virtual platforms promoting shamanic tendencies rise up like Merlin's mushrooms. Look at the mainstream media, Gaia for instance, or even Netflix. Some series are promoting spiritual expansion, and they can be found all over the place. This is most probably due to the virtual webs and the echo of the psychedelic awakening in the 60s. The combination of those two factors woke up deeper tribal tendencies in our current society. And suddenly it's hip and cool to be spiritual and hyped up to travel to the American jungles for a ceremony of the ayahuasca brew or some sort, which in my opinion is pretty amazing. But we gotta stay cautious for tricksters and unqualified shamans, people who confuse a psychedelic illusion and consider all their visions to be real, neglecting their inner subconscious turmoil, or even people who have stumbled into the mystical realms once and completely deluded by their egos, stating that they're enlightened beings. And many times these people have a really big following as well. And that's exactly why I'll share with you a good way to recognize real teachers from trickster gurus and narcissistic egotistical fake leaders. Try and become aware whether or not they will teach you how to become independent. And in many cases they want you to stick around and they will teach you all sorts of stuff in exchange for collective moments of casual things transformed into what they consider a collective sphere of enlightenment, and many times they include very complicated words and preach theories that nobody really understands but everyone agrees to, and in some cases they manage to sell this for a really high price. You see, becoming spiritually engaged is not expensive. This doesn't mean that any spiritual counseling, teacher or therapist cannot ask any financial means in return. In fact, in the previous eras in dead communities, the nomad shaman was offered a free stay or free food in exchange for his or her service. Because that's exactly what the shaman offers, a service or a teaching of some kind. And just like many artists today, the only way artists were able to survive in the past was selling products or artworks, but now, through the evolution of the artistic direction, the artist can also offer services, such as a performance or a happening, for instance. And the shaman and artist always had to reinvent their role, their work, or a job in order to fit into a capitalist society. The artist in some way has a lot more in common with the shaman than you might imagine. The shaman, just like the artist, dives into parallel worlds to come with knowledge and new lessons to teach. The shaman considers that world to be the spirit world, and the artist considers that world to be the world of imagination. Many artists, including myself, experience a certain kind of overlapping between these two dimensions, but that's not really necessary though. The artist also tries to kind of hold a mirror in front of society, attempting to explain what nobody can explain, but everyone feels it, as if there's a huge, thick layer of invisible smog drifting over our heads. The artist needs to make us aware of that smog, and the shaman in fact tries to break that mirror, and he will teach you how to go inwards, reflecting yourself into the silent waters of the collective subconscious and guiding you to levels of self-improvement. In many ways, the stories that shamans have around them, such as the ceremonies and the rituals they perform before they invite you along the journey of psychedelic consciousness, are of a very theatrical nature. I mean, how do you prepare someone to dive into a whole different dimension? You cannot do that through a rational way of dealing with things. The shaman, just like the artist, has to transcend the common language in order to create a new language. So the shaman had to invent all kinds of tools, devices and primal technologies to make you ready and teleport you into a whole new experience of consciousness. And their creations have to comfort and at the same time challenge you. They have to be convincing, and these objects serve the purpose of convincing you. These tools need to make you aware that their creators, or the people who wear them, are guides who know the parallel dimensions. Shamans have, just like the artist sung, they have painted, they have danced, they have performed, and have in all many ways created over thousands of years. And of course, the artist doesn't need to believe in spirits, and he doesn't need to dive into plants and ceremonies in order to create, but in some way, the artist is a director of consciousness. Just like the shaman directs your consciousness, guiding you on a psychedelic journey and sings sacred songs into the wounds of your emotional, etheric or astral and physical bodies, the artist observes your consciousness and channels it in direction to their creation, and hopefully manages to achieve an exchange of energy, which might also be of an uplifting nature. Thereby, the artist, just like the shaman, carries a huge burden, but also an immense responsibility. And that responsibility that artists and shamans have has in many ways been neglected, refused, and ignored by politics, for instance. The shaman and the artists are funnily and weirdly enough true guides of the human clarity. Just like the shaman, the artist has a tremendous responsibility. It is impossible to explain all the responsibility in a single audio blog, and I don't even know if I can list up all the responsibilities, but I'll try and give you at least a few important ones. The artist, she is at the foundation of language. She is the channeler of consciousness and needs to pinpoint exactly the possible direction society is taking. The artist needs to be ahead of society. Successful art is always ahead of politics, because art is never late. She is in fact blessed by divine timing and broadens, just like the philosophy, the horizons of possibilities that the community and the society faces in times of abundance and in times of crisis. In fact, it's the philosopher who needs to indicate the avenues of infinite possibilities, and it's the artist who makes this clear in her own language. And this language needs to be visible. It might be kind of cruel to state it like this, especially being a Belgian citizen, a country which has faced a tremendous cut in the art budget. If politics succeed in suppressing the artist's message, thereby also their responsibility, it is the artist who has failed, and not the politicians. Because the artist is always ahead of politics. And the artist knew politics was going to neglect art once again, because it's in the nature of politics to disappoint. And it's the oath of an artist to not disappoint but improve humanity, even if society doesn't give a fuck about art. The artist needs to show the power of art. So I believe that this transformation that we currently experience from this old society into the new one, whatever you want to call this society, a society entering in the era of Aquarius or governed by technologies and virtual powers, I believe it will only benefit the artist and the shaman. And I will tell you more about that in the next audioblog or whatever you want to call it. So here we go, and thank you for staying tuned.